Well, good afternoon, everyone. We want to welcome you. My name is Michelle Fay, and I'll be hosting together with Rachel Balsley. Rachel and I work together at Stop Waste on the team to help businesses recycle and compost and comply with state and local laws. We want to thank you all for joining us here today. We have about a 30-minute presentation planned, and we'll start with a brief overview of the new rules. We'll also plan to spend the bulk of our time together to walk through the steps to set up a successful recycling and composting program at your site. We'll cover the various free resources available to help you, and we'll also give you some time to start thinking through the next steps for your site so you're ready to take action right after this webinar. We hope to have about 10 minutes remaining for your questions at the end. Some of you already submitted specific questions as part of the registration, and many of those will be answered throughout today's slides. If you have additional questions that come up as we're going through, please feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We plan to address as many as we can in the last section of today's webinar. Also, if you happen to have any technical difficulties, please feel free to let us know via the chat, and we'll do our best to help you out. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we plan to follow up in the next day or so with an email to all of you with the recording link, as well as links to the free resources that we'll be mentioning throughout today's webinar. So there's no need to take detailed notes. To kick us off, I'd like to start with just a few words about Stop Waste, in case you're unfamiliar. We're a county-wide public agency with 17 member agencies, and those include the 14 cities, 2 sanitary districts, and the unincorporated areas of Alameda County. Our mission is to send less waste to landfill from Alameda County's homes, schools, and businesses, and to do our best to use resources more efficiently. We help our member agencies implement state laws such as SB 1383, which is being implemented locally here in Alameda County as the Organics Reduction and Recycling Ordinance. When compostable materials like food, paper, and yard waste are buried in landfills instead of composted or recycled, they produce methane, a potent greenhouse gas that contributes to climate change. The new state law aims to fight climate change, setting a goal to reduce organics going to landfills by 75% by the year 2025. The law also sets targets to recover and donate edible food. That's because much of the food currently thrown away in California is perfectly good to eat and could feed people instead of going to waste or even being composted. You might be wondering, hasn't recycling and composting been the law for a while? And if you're in Alameda County, you're absolutely correct. Most of these rules are not new. For example, you've had to have recycling and compost service sort right and educate staff and contractors at least once a year, as well as during any move-in or move-out of tenants. And that's been in place for several years now. But the new rules give more specifics and details. In addition to the 3 old requirements, you now also need to provide color-coded and labeled indoor bins, periodically check those bins, and provide feedback if materials are found in the wrong bins. The requirement that is the most different or new is that some larger businesses that produce extra food will now need to make sure the surplus edible food is recovered and donated to feed people instead of sent to compost. So today's webinar is primarily focused on the recycling and composting side of things. We do plan to have a separate webinar on food recovery and donation, but we want to briefly square away those rules now, just in case they also apply to your site. There's 2 groups of larger businesses and organizations that, starting at different dates, will need to recover surplus edible food. You can see on the screen which food generating sites fall into each of these groups or tiers. If you fall into one of these categories, you'll need to safely recover your edible food and contract with a food recovery partner to redistribute it to places like food banks and soup kitchens. So we will be sure to send an invite to that specific food recovery webinar. But in the meantime, if you want to learn more, you can visit our dedicated webpage on this topic, which is posted on the screen. So let's jump in on recycling and composting now. There are 4 main steps for success to compliance. Over the next several slides, we'll take a closer look at each step and share some local success stories. But before we do that, we're hoping to get a better sense of who's in the room here with us today. We'd like to know where you all are at in this process. So Rachel, I'm hoping you won't mind launching our anonymous poll. And I'll go ahead and read it out loud for folks so you can start to think about where you are and then enter your responses when you get a chance. So thinking about your specific business or workplace, which step best describes where you're at? Do you need to order recycling and or compost service? Or perhaps you have the service but don't yet have good indoor bins? If you're at step 3, you essentially have all the bins and service, but materials really just are not getting sorted properly yet. And sites at step 4 have everything in place, but could use help with some ongoing training or perhaps troubleshooting to refine your programs. We did also include E, none of the above. It's possible none of these scenarios apply, which is fine. You can mark that. Maybe you've already completed all the steps, or perhaps you're just joining us today to listen in. So in any case, we're happy to have all of you here with us, and we will leave the poll open for just a few more seconds before we close it out and share the results. In just a moment, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. But what I did see, we're mostly going to hold our questions till the end. But I did want to also mention that we will include a PDF of these slides in the follow-up email to you all. So again, no need to take too detailed notes. Okay, let's see here. I'm going to go ahead. It looks like most people have submitted their entries. And let's see how these results look. Okay, I believe you all can see the results. Hopefully you can. I'm not super sure. But from my end, it looks like there's a real mix of folks that are here with us today. Most of you already have recycling and compost service. Some of you still need to set up indoor bins, but it looks like for the most part, folks are either just trying to get people to sort right or making some final tweaks to your programs. So let's go ahead and start taking a little bit of a closer look at the various steps. The first step is ordering the service that you need by contacting your garbage service provider. So for those of you who are at this step, you're going to want to take a look at what is being thrown away to see what could be recycled or composted instead. Fortunately, in many cases, the cost of recycling and compost service is less than the cost of garbage, so there can often be a cost savings. For example, Redwood Surgery Center in Castro Valley, a few years ago, they did a waste assessment that showed much of what was ending up in their garbage could be recycled or composted. They increased their recycling by 50%, added compost service, and as a result, they were able to reduce their garbage by 63% and cut their monthly garbage bill in half, from $800 to $400. I want to share another success story, and in this case, the business owners didn't only get recyclable and compostable materials out of the garbage, but they also took steps to prevent waste in the first place. Lola's Chicken Shack in Alameda replaced single-use plastic water cups with reusable cups and eliminated some other disposable serviceware items. As a result, their garbage is no longer overflowing, and they save $3,200 each year on disposable food service items they no longer need to buy. They also noticed that with fewer disposables for customers to sort, there's a lot less wrong stuff in the recycling and composting bins front of house. And in case you happen to be wondering about the extra water for washing the reusable cups, the owners say that the increase is very minimal and the extra time for loading the dishwasher is far less than what they used to spend on bagging all the garbage and managing the inventory of the disposables. So when you're looking at your current collection service, it's a good time to also think about what kind of waste you could get rid of altogether. So once your outdoor bins and services are ordered, you'll need to set up indoor bins so materials can be sorted right. Imagine with me that this is your back of house setup and staff has some carrot peels, for example, to toss. Those peels most likely will wind up in that garbage bin instead of the compost where they belong. Now compare that to this setup. The single trash can was replaced with a 3-bin station. They take up about the same amount of floor space, and now staff can easily toss those peels into the green bin. Even if you can't keep all 3 bins right next to each other, you'll at least want to be sure that all the bins are within easy reach and eye shot. Labeled and color-coded bins are also a new requirement, and that's so it's clear with a quick glance which bin is for each material. We recommend labeling bins on 2 sides in case they get turned around. When possible, add signs at eye level to show more specifically what goes in each bin. And I also encourage you to check out our indoor bin guide and worksheet, which has more tips and tools to help you walk through this specific step for your site. Before we move to step 3, I'd like to share another business example. Here you can see Wen Qi Fu, the owner of Ruby King Bakery in Oakland's Chinatown district, with his color-coded and labeled back-of-house bins. They were strategically placed right next to the bakery prep table where recyclable containers, food scraps from dough preparation, and trash items like plastic bags are generated. It's now basically just as convenient for bakers to separate the materials and put them in the correct bins as it was before tossing everything into the trash. Here's Ruby King's front of house area where customers can purchase beverages and eat their pastries on site. Since most discards like paper napkins and pastry scraps are compostable, the owner set up a larger green bin for these organics with a small black caddy attached for the remaining few trash items. No blue bin was needed here since no recyclables are generated at that particular location. So as a result of these small tweaks, both back of house and front of house, Wen Qi was able to cut his garbage service in half. To help customers sort right, custom signs were created for front of house bins at Ruby King. Our sign maker tool is a free resource that makes creating custom signs super easy. For example, if you want to make a compost sign, simply scroll through the image menu under step 1 to find the items that reflect what's being tossed at that particular disposal location and drag the image over to the sign on the right. You can then customize the text at the bottom to remind people what doesn't belong. When you're done, download and print your signs and post them at eye level above the bins. And now here we are at step 3. Really, this is where the rubber meets the road, sorting materials properly. And I will be the first to admit this is often the toughest part. Sorting can be tricky, and what goes where can depend on what city you're in. For the most part, though, there's a core set of materials that are always recyclable, compostable, or garbage, no matter where you're located. For example, if you look at the center section for recycling, aluminum and steel cans, plastic bottles labeled with a 1 or a 2, and glass bottles and jars are always recyclable. Paper and cardboard are also pretty much always going to be recyclable. And looking at the compost side, discarded food soiled paper like paper towels, pizza boxes, and uncoated paper plates, along with plant debris, are always compostable and can go in the green bin. There are some materials that aren't universally accepted, so you'll need to check with your local rules to see what goes where. Plastics labeled with anything besides a 1 or a 2 are a good example. Also, milk cartons and coffee cups, really any paper that's lined with plastic or waxed cardboard boxes, aluminum foil, compostable plastics, these are all items that really depend on the city that you're in. One of the easiest ways, I think, to look up these specifics is with another tool that we're pretty excited about, and that's our resource tool. You can either type in an item to see where it goes in your city, or you can click on the icon with the 3 bins for specific curbside information for your city that will show basically every item that is accepted in your city's bins. You can also find your garbage service provider's phone number in this tool if you need it. Okay, one business that really has proper sorting down is First Street Ale House in Livermore, with over 80% of their waste going to recycling and composting. They're a family-run business that's always cared about sorting right, and it certainly shows. The photos of the contents of their recycling and compost bins that you see here are actually taken by their garbage company, who told us the worst they've seen in First Street Ale House's compost bin is an occasional rubber glove on top of perfectly separated food scraps. But for the most part, their bins are consistently clean. So with this example, we know it can be done and done well. I want to, just before we leave this slide, I just want to mention you may be wondering about the clear plastic bags that their materials are in. Depending on which city you're located in, there are rules for what kind of bags can be used. And in Livermore, clear untied plastic bags are allowed and are pulled out at the recycling and compost facilities. Okay, last but not least, the 4th step to recycling and composting well is to provide education about what goes where, check your bins periodically, and provide feedback or make adjustments to things as needed. The law requires managers or owners to educate employees, contractors, and any commercial tenants that you may have about the law and proper sorting at least once a year. Don't forget to include this training as part of regular onboarding of new staff as well. Again, this is all just to support the main goal, which is getting organics and recyclables out of the landfill by sorting right. Isla Restaurant in Newark, they have this figured out. Angel is the owner, and she had worked with one of our stop waste business assistance reps, Christina, to add compost service, increase their recycling, and then get their indoor bin station set up. Angel impressed on her staff that this is really a priority for management, and she made sure all the staff attended an in-person training with Christina. Lucky for Isla, their head server took the leadership role in the process. He not only translated as needed for other Filipino team members, but he's the one who's also been kind of keeping an eye on what's going in the bins and then occasionally reminding staff when he sees things going in the wrong bins. Now, recycling and composting is really simply just part of their back of house process, and it's become the norm for staff to sort into three bins instead of 1. So with that, I want to briefly recap the 4 steps to compliance. First, you'll make sure you have the collection service for recycling and composting in addition to garbage. Second, you'll set up your indoor bin stations, and they'll be color-coded and labeled. Third, you'll want to be clear on where items your site typically generates need to go, and then how to sort right. And fourth, train your staff, contractors, and tenants on the sorting rules at least annually, but even better is on an ongoing basis. And then check the bins to see where you need to provide feedback. And remember, at each step, see if there's ways you can eliminate waste, maybe by switching to reusables rather than disposable items if possible. I want to also recap the free resources we offer to Alameda County businesses and institutions. We've seen several of these throughout today's presentation, and there are a few more I want to be sure to share. We have our customizable signs, along with a customizable training poster, free stickers to label indoor bins, the indoor bin guide I mentioned, as well as some training videos. We also offer up to $500 for free indoor green bins. And I encourage you all to take a look at this website, stopwaste.org/rules-resources, where you can find all of these listed and more information. So moving on to free technical assistance. We offer free assistance with our knowledgeable field reps. Often businesses find that sometimes just a call with one of them will meet their needs. But if not, you can move along and set up a video call or an in-person visit to get hands-on help with any of the steps we covered today. We're hoping you'll take a moment now just to kind of pause and think about how we can help you and your site be successful in recycling and composting. If you feel like an in-person visit would be helpful, we'll typically offer a waste assessment to first see what your collection needs are and see if there's a way to save money on your garbage bill. We also are happy to help set up those indoor bins, making sure they're labeled properly and color-coded. And then our team is often asked to train employees and custodians on proper sorting, and that's something we're more than happy to help with and can provide that in Spanish as well as Chinese if needed. So to get started on that process, you'll go to our online request form, which is at stopwaste.org/request-help. And I added just a few screenshots to show you what those steps look like. So you'll start by entering basic information on the main page. And then once you hit the submit button, a new window is going to pop up. And there you'll click the link to select the date and time for your initial consultation. This calendar feature is actually something new that we're excited to be trying out. So hopefully you find it helpful. That whole process should take just a minute or so. And then one of our assistance representatives will call you at your selected time. So it's as easy as that to get started. Hopefully I've motivated you. This concludes the presentation portion of our webinar. And now we have some time set aside for your questions. I mentioned earlier, we did receive several great questions as part of the registration process. And I think as I've been speaking, I've seen some pop up in the Q&A as well. But I wanted to start today by addressing one question that seems to come up a lot, and that's about exemptions. Specifically, is my site exempt from having to follow the rules and requirements of having compost service? Sometimes people also ask about different scenarios they have for recycling service. Sometimes they backhaul or self-haul. So I thought that might be a good one to kind of kick off our Q&A session. And for that, Rachel is back. I see you again. Thanks for joining back in. And Rachel, if you wouldn't mind just helping, I do have a couple of slides here we can keep sharing. And if you wanted to just touch on exemptions and our certification for recycling service, that'd be a great start.
Yeah, no problem. So there are two types of situations where a business or organization can forego having the required recycling or compost collection service. But you have to apply for a waiver. You can't just skip getting the service without having an approved waiver on file with us. And this is for those of you who might be out of county. this would be through your own city or county as well. Where Stop Waste is taking the lead on processing waivers for Alameda County businesses. And let's just talk about waivers for compost collection service first. You can apply for a waiver if your business simply doesn't generate enough compostables. The thresholds for that are shown here on the slide. And to help you gauge what those thresholds mean, imagine 2 5-gallon buckets in a garbage can, or 4 5-gallon buckets in a garbage bin for those of you who might have larger amount of service. If you have less compostable materials like food scraps, food soil paper, and plant debris, then those volumes, you may qualify for a waiver. You can also apply for a waiver if you don't have enough space for the necessary collection bins, but this will require documentation from your garbage company, city staff, or city engineers to document that space constraints. So if either of these situations do apply to you, you can submit a waiver request in the web page URL shown here on the slide. And then I'll just spend another minute on our other second situation that grants an exemption from the recycling and compost collection requirement, which is what we call alternative service arrangements. And this can be this kind of situation where you might share bins and service with a neighboring business, or you haul your own recyclables or have a third party other than your garbage company pick up these materials. As with the compost collection waivers, you must proactively submit the necessary documentation to get the certification of recycling service, and you can do so at the web page link below. The waivers and certifications get a little confusing, so this is also something that our technical assistance team is more than happy to help you with. So now let's turn back to see some of the other questions that people have submitted in the Q&A that we can see in the back end. I know you can't see them, but as a reminder, if we don't get to your question today, please just submit the request help form and we'd be happy to reach out to you directly after today's webinar. So I am seeing some of the other questions that have come up. And I think some of them may have been answered during the course of the presentation. There has been a couple of questions around, seeing the pictures that show clear plastic bags in the compost collection stream. And as Michelle did mention, whether those can be used in your city is a city-specific situation. So it may be that some cities allow it and others do not. We have created a tool that is for Alameda County jurisdictions that allows you to check if they're allowed in your jurisdiction. And we can try to pop that into the chat as well, but it's also accessible through our resources page. And just one note about that, we are seeing that sometimes these the allowability of plastic bags can change over time. So that's something that we're trying to keep up to date with, but it's always best to periodically check the resources that we have or contact your service provider for clarification if you're unsure. Let's see. We also had a question about whether, which of these requirements that we've talked about today are for specifically commercial properties or businesses. And this presentation has been pretty much solely focused in on business requirements. And as Michelle said, we'll be following up with the PowerPoint slide deck and a link to the recording to all registered participants. Just as an aside, the multifamily requirements are very similar. So if you're a property owner or manager of multifamily properties, they pretty much mirror the business requirements. Let's see, what else? There has been a question about, labeling and getting stickers to show your employees about the correct sorting. That is definitely one of the resources we have available for, I just noticed we have a little typo on this page. The resources should have an E in the end there. So we'll fix it before we send it out to you. But the Alameda County businesses can get free indoor bin stickers from us, and that is also linked to from the resources page. If any of my colleagues can help to, maybe I could do that, post that for everyone. Let me do that now, actually. So here's the resources link, and a lot of stuff on there, including the request for stickers. Let's see what else we have here. We do have a question about coated like coffee cups. The question is, how do you tell the difference between waxed and plastic coated cups? So we've seen in the industry that, and maybe Michelle might be able to add to this as well, that kind of plastic coated cups have kind of gone away. So pretty much if there's any kind of coating in that, say a coffee cup, a paper coffee cup, it's gonna be plastic coated.
Rachel, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Wax coated cups have gone away. I think you said
Yes.
Plastic, but yes.
You're right. Thanks for that correction there.
No
yeah,
problem.
So I think you can safely assume that the coating is plastic coated. And we are seeing in the industry that those are becoming less the ability to compost that is lessening, primarily because there can be microplastics that get into the compost. And so we're recommending that those do not get added to your organics collection.
I'll just add that in jurisdictions that allow compostable plastic lined paper products, there are some available, but it's a pretty niche market to have a coffee cup that's lined with plastic, but it's a BPI certified compostable plastic. So those are a little bit different than the regular coffee cups that have a thin plastic lining that's not compostable. So there's a couple different products out there, but ultimately it gets kind of tricky to be able to tell the difference. You guys are absolutely right. That one's tough.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I have also a couple of questions that have to do like with sort of more specifics about what might be allowable in your particular city's collection. And as Michelle did talk about, we have our resource tool that has what we've tried to make a pretty comprehensive list. I'm going to drop this into the chat too. That allows you to click on that curbside bin on that page and see that list of what all is acceptable in your city's collection program. There is a question around penalties for noncompliance. So yes, the new laws do allow for the issuance of penalties after noncompliance, and those penalties can start as of this year. I think most jurisdictions in our county, we're giving some time for folks to get their programs up in place. But the first thing that I think is most important that Michelle went over is getting that collection service started. And so the penalties are going to range from between $50 and $150 for citations. There will be warnings that are sent if you don't have the required service first before the issuance of penalties. And then I'll also note that if there's continued non-compliance, there is the possibility of those fine amounts increasing for second or third violations. So it's not just that first level fines that you might be at risk of if you're not complying.
Rachel, I can jump in on one. There's a question here asking if compostable cutlery and bags are actually composted at the facility. And what I can share is that for the most part, those thicker plastic materials like the compostable forks and spoons, when we've taken tours at compost facilities and we look at the end at the finished compost, those have just not had enough time to break down in the commercial compost process. It's usually a couple of months that our compost takes or our organics take to turn into compost at those facilities. And those thick compostable forks need more like 3 months to break down. So it's just not enough time. I will say, though, that the compostable plastic bags do tend to break down. However, not every facility can accept them depending on how they're using their finished compost and if it's going to organic farms or not. There's some rules around what they can accept. So yes, some things are actually composted, but it still depends on your local jurisdiction. So you will have to check locally, and that resource tool will give you the information on whether or not they're accepted.
Thanks, Michelle. I also saw a question about indoor containers that might have lids on them. So if you have not taken advantage of our free indoor food scrap bin program in the past, I definitely want to encourage folks to take a look at that. And now it's not showing up as a hyperlink, but I can get that for you. On our resources page that I listed previously, is a link to our request form for those free indoor green bins. And we do have some options through our partner vendors that have some lids. So that is definitely available. Let's see what else. We also have a question. We have a few more minutes for questions, so we'll try to get in as many as we can. Hopefully it's not going too fast for you. A question about sort of what's considered a business. One example being a religious facility. So actually the state and local laws define a business very broadly. So that would be basically nonprofits, organizations, institutions, including churches and faith-based organizations. So all these requirements that we've talked about today would apply to all of those types of organizations, even if you're not a for-profit business. Let's see, Michelle, if you also are seeing any other questions.
Sure. There is a question on shredded paper. That's another tricky one that you can check the resource tool on, but most jurisdictions will say to put shredded paper in the compost bin, because what happens is this tiny little pieces of paper will get mixed in with other materials at the recycling facility. So it can be really hard to recycle shredded paper. So at that point, it can be used to kind of help line your green bin or just kind of mix it with food in your green cart. But oftentimes that would go to compost instead of recycling. But again, check the resource tool. You'll find it's your friend.
And because there was a lot of questions about whether bags are acceptable in your jurisdiction, I'm going to put the link to, how come these are not showing up? I apologize. Let me get the link as a hyperlink as well. But here's another one. So Michelle, also, if you are seeing other questions, they're kind of popping in quickly. So
sure. Question about outdoor bin labels. So the stickers that we provide to Alameda County businesses, those are for indoor bins. You're going to want to check with your local hauler to request new stickers for your outdoor bins if you need them.
Yeah, great, Michelle, thanks.
Sure.
So trying to see if there are ones that we have not covered yet.
Lots of questions about proper sorting and where to put things.
Yeah, and again, that curbside tool from our resource tool has as much information as we have about that. So let's see. Michelle, are you seeing other ones that we want to?
A lot of them are just real specific. And I think for many of those questions, we encourage you to use the request help form so that one of our assistance reps can provide that more nuanced support to you and help answer your questions.
Yeah. I also noticed that we have one participant that is asking about, stickers that might be on your bins currently, your collection bins. It's very likely that in the next year or so, we're going to see some updated stickers coming into place and re-stickering of a lot of those service provider collection bins. That is actually a requirement of the law. Because there have been shifts in what's acceptable, if you got a bin many years ago, it might have changed over time. So I do think that you can expect to see some shifts in that, and hopefully that will come in the form of either a re-stickering of your bin or educational materials that are sent to you directly from your service provider or your city. I think we are nearing the end. So I think we've answered a lot of the ones that have come into us. We're at about 3:45 right now. So Michelle, do you want to kind of wrap up things and again, remind folks of what we're going to follow up with?
Yep, sounds good. Thanks, Rachel. So we're going to go ahead and close out today's presentation. As we said earlier, we are recording this. We hope to send the email out to you in the next day or so that'll have the recording for you, as well as the presentation slides, and then all of the links that we've shared today to get free resources. And then we just really encourage you to go ahead and submit that request help form so we can follow up with you and get the support you need to comply and recycle and compost and hopefully make less waste and maybe even reduce your garbage service. Wouldn't that be great? So that is it for us today. Thank you all for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you all soon. Thanks.